So what have you checked out this month?
Do you want to say it like that every time?
Yeah. I could probably just reuse the same sound sample.
I watched I guess you'd call it a series on Roku called Slugfest. Slugfest is, it's not an adaptation, I guess, but it's inspired by the book Slugfest by Reed Tucker, which is about the competition between DC and Marvel over the years. I read the book. I expected it to be just a really cheaply put together piece of crap, but it turned out to be really good. And I had the same reaction to this show. I expected it to be just a cheaply made cash in on the popularity of superhero movies right now. But it turned out to be really good, with a lot of interviews with actual people that were involved in the events that are being discussed. And they even got a lot of very big name actors to portray a lot of these characters, in dramatizations of recreations of past events or whatever.
Well, yeah, they probably told these actors it's a comic book movie, and they were like, "Oh man, I can make bank on that." I'm not familiar with that character, but yeah, I'll play him.
Stan Lee, who was that? I was really impressed, in particular, by the people playing Stan Lee and Jack Kirby back in the 60s and 70s. You had Ray Wise as Jack Kirby, who I would not have thought of, but he does a really good job. And you had Sean Gunn, brother of James Gunn, playing Stan Lee. And when I first saw him, I was like, oh, really? But then as soon as he talked, he has the Stan Lee voice and mannerisms and everything down perfectly. It was really impressive. This season was only like 10 episodes, and they're all maybe I think 8 minutes long or something like that. So they're really short. It goes by really quickly, which is honestly one of my big negatives about it, is any one of these subjects that are being talked about could have an entire hour and a half documentary devoted to them. And they just go by too quickly. And I hope it means that we're getting another season later, given that this was released as season 1. But I can't imagine how expensive it might have been to get all these people in for just tiny, in some cases, basically just cameo roles. In some cases, people don't even talk. You had Brandon Routh in there as Joe Simon, I think. You had Lance Henriksen as old Stan Lee, which was disappointing because he basically was just Lance Henriksen with Stan Lee makeup on. He didn't try to imitate him at all or anything, or even change his voice. But it was really good. If anybody's interested in comics history or anything like that, I often find comics history more interesting than the comics themselves. I mean, I love comics, but there's just so much interesting stuff that was happening.
And this series is actually factual. It's not imagining what happened in those scenarios.
Right, and the fact that they got so many of the actual creators there for interviews really makes it a lot better. There were a couple times where they had kind of, I guess you'd say, celebrities talking about things, talking about comics, and it's like, did they really read comics, or are they just being actors,
Mm-hmm.
And the whole time I was kind of trying to figure out who the narrator was. I was like, it sounds kind of like Kevin Smith, but he's doing too good of a job and kind of toning it down. I don't think it's Kevin Smith. And it turned out it was Kevin Smith. I know you don't like Kevin Smith.
Not recently.
I'm pretty indifferent toward him. I haven't really seen much of his stuff, but he actually did a really good job narrating this show, and I know he knows comics and stuff like that. So in this case, I think it was a good choice.
I wouldn't say I don't like Kevin Smith, period. I would say I don't like his personality and the way he comes off in interviews and stuff. But some of his work I do like. Like the recent Masters of the Universe thing I thought was pretty good.
Okay, yeah, I remember you talking about that. I'm going to jump to something I read because it relates to why I watched some of the movies I watched this month. I read a book by Charles Band.
Oh, so nice. Low budget book is what you're saying.
It was a memoir called Confessions of a Puppet Master, a Hollywood memoir of ghouls, guts, and gonzo filmmaking. It was mostly really good. It was really funny. There's a lot of really good stories about things that happened in the making of the movies he worked on. For anyone who doesn't know who Charles Band is, we talked about him in our Dr. Mordred video, but he was a low-budget filmmaker that was in charge of Empire Pictures back in the 80s, and then he kind of lost control of that basically, and it fell apart, and he ended up starting Full Moon with Paramount, which did mostly direct-to-video, again, low-budget horror and sci-fi movies mostly. Nowadays, he's mostly putting out crap, which he's mostly pretty honest about in the book. He doesn't try to talk himself up or talk up the quality of what he does or anything like that. He's pretty honest about it and about his reasons for making a lot of these movies and stuff like that. I was actually surprised at how honest he got about a lot of stuff, because he talks about cheating on his wife and then cheating on his other wife, and he goes into a lot of stuff. But he does not mention stealing Dr. Mordred from Jack Kirby. Even though Jack Kirby does pop up, he actually talks about Marvel a lot and how influenced he was by Marvel, which again we talked about in the Dr. Mordred video.
Right.
But he still seems to refer to Dr. Mordred as an original idea, which is not surprising. for anybody who's interested in Empire or Full Moon, this is definitely a book to check out. It was very entertaining. He doesn't really go into the making of a lot of movies that much. It really is more personal overall, I would say. But there are so many good stories and just crazy things that were happening in the making of these movies that, behind the scenes, that I would still really recommend this book. While I was reading the book, I decided to check off some of the movies that I hadn't seen on his filmography. So I watched Laserblast from 1978. This is a movie that pops up on a lot of worst movies ever lists. And every time I see that, I just kind of, you just whatever. People are going to point at specific things and say, oh, this, you got to watch it for this. But this was a case where this movie was so bad and so stupid and just so ineptly put together that I totally understand why people would put it on a list like that. It's not even so bad that it's good. It's just mostly really boring and just baffling as to why they made some of the choices that they did, including the casting of the lead, because this is a guy that has not just zero charisma, but negative charisma. The movie basically is about a kid who finds a laser gun out in the desert, and whenever it kind of attaches to your arm, and whenever he puts it on, he seems to kind of get possessed or something and kind of start turning evil, and he just starts blasting everything. His character is extremely unlikable, and I kind of thought it was going to be the kind of thing where he's a guy that's getting picked on maybe, and he turns against his tormentors and just starts blowing them away, which could have been cool, but this is a movie where you're probably more on the side of the people that are picking on him because he's so unlikable. And honestly, you just want to see everybody die in this movie, which thankfully mostly happens. And there are a lot of attempts at comedy, especially with the cops, that just completely fall flat and are just stupid. Honestly, the only good thing about the movie is some of the stop motion, which was headed by David Allen. Actually, I think this was the first movie that he worked with Charles Band on. There's not really anything else to watch this movie for. So even though it has that reputation of being a bad movie that you should watch, I would disagree and say this is a bad movie you should avoid, mostly just because it's boring. If you watch 5 minutes of it, you kind of get the idea. I went on to the movie Dolls from 1985, which was directed by Stuart Gordon. I had always planned on watching this movie for that reason. This was between Reanimator and From Beyond, which are both really cool movies. And reading about it in Charles Band's book, he talked about how Stuart Gordon kept trying to make the movie better and was kind of trying to put too much into it and make it too big of a movie. And he also talked about the cool stop motion by David Allen again, and it made me move it up to the top of the list. It's about this family, a father, daughter, and the daughter's stepmother, who is just a piece of shit. They're driving out in the rain, and they end up having to stop at this house where this old couple lives. And it turns out they make toys that are alive. Some of them are people that were turned into toys, but I mean, things are not really explained. It was interesting that the guy was played by Guy Rolfe, who would go on to play Andre Toulon in the Puppet Master movies, where he's also making puppets that are alive. And he was by far the best part of this movie. He was really cool. And it was interesting in that it's a horror movie where the people making the evil toys or whatever are the villains, and there's no way to really look away from that. But the movie ends with them just staying there in the house and the daughter leaving with this other guy that also got stuck there after her parents are killed, basically. And it's a happy ending, and they're parting happily with the doll makers, but they're killing people and turning them into dolls. So it was kind of unique in that way. The other guy that got stuck there that she leaves with at the end was played by Stephen Lee, who we saw before in The Vengeance Factor. And we talked about how goofy his acting was in there.
Right.
In this movie, he plays, I guess you would say, the comic relief. And he was allowed to improvise a lot of his comedy, if you can even call it that. Oh man, it was really bad. I could see him being a decent comedy actor maybe in a different movie, but in here just letting him do whatever he wants and just kind of pointing the camera at him does not work. The only good thing about this movie was the stop motion again. And in this case, it was actually really cool because the things being animated are dolls. You don't have to make creatures that are supposed to look like creatures. They're just dolls. And doing it in stop motion actually makes them really creepy. And I wasn't really expecting that. It was really effective. But the rest of the movie was pretty dumb. It was very much one of those 80s movies where you have characters that come in and you just want them to die as soon as they show up. Again, kind of like Laserblast. But it was definitely a lot better than Laserblast. If it was on TV and there was nothing else, I would say maybe check it out, but don't go out of your way for it. I watched a documentary from 2013 called Rewind This, which I thought was going to be about kind of the history of the VHS era and kind of, how it started and how it ended. But it was more about, I guess, VHS collectors and kind of the nostalgia that comes from that and all that kind of thing. And people on this channel probably don't know how much I hate the concept of nostalgia. If you like something because it makes you think of when you were a kid, that's fine. But that doesn't make it something inherently interesting to other people.
That's true.
And I mean, I come from the VHS era, and I still have tubs of VHS tapes that I'm not going to get rid of. But I'm not some, hipster weirdo who's going out looking to complete my VHS collection of whatever type of movie or whatever.
I remember when I got rid of mine, or the majority of mine, I was surprised at how freaking heavy those things were in bulk.
Yeah, and they take up so much space and everything. There's no practical reason to have VHS tapes at this point other than, like in my case, it's because I have a lot of movies that are not on DVD, and you're not going to find them streaming anywhere. And they talk about that in the documentary a little bit.
It was such a great day when I could finally get rid of my VHS of The Video Dead because it was released in another form.
I think in my case, the only other reason I would keep VHS tapes is for the cover art sometimes. And even then, I would probably say, just get rid of the tape and just keep the box, because it just takes up so much space. There were parts of the documentary that were interesting where they actually did talk to people that were involved in the industry, including Charles Band and some other people. And that stuff was interesting. But I don't want to watch a documentary where people are talking about how much they love VHS tapes and how extensive their collection is or how it's organized or, whatever. I don't care.
There are a lot of documentaries where they're not actually about what they're supposed to be about. They're just about people reminiscing about the topic without any actual information. It's like, I don't care about your personal life and how it affected you.
Yeah, exactly. If I had known that's what it was going to be, if that's how it had been kind of presented, then I wouldn't have watched it. And maybe it was originally, because I think it was a Kickstarter video or something like that. But that was not what I thought it was going to be when I went into it. So yeah, I guess if you want to hear other people talk about things that you like, if you like VHS tapes, then maybe watch it. I don't know.
And how it affected them.
Yeah, if you actually want some legitimate information about the VHS era, you'll get a little bit. I would say skip the first half and then, skip most of the second half too. This is really not the place to go for that, unfortunately. I watched a movie from 1985 called The Titan Find, which was slightly edited down in the US into the movie Creature. I had seen the Creature version before a long time ago, but I didn't remember anything about it, so I decided to watch The Titan Find. And I can see why I didn't remember anything about it. It's mostly really, really boring. It's basically just a direct Alien ripoff. The only semi-interesting things about it were... The first thing was something that they probably took from Planet of the Vampires, which was one of the influences on the first Alien, where people that are killed by the creature get possessed by it or something. They come back to life as conscious zombies or something. I don't know. It's never explained. And they help the creature to kill other people. Again, never explained. It's just kind of there. Something I saw a lot when I was looking this movie up was people pointing out that the people that worked on the practical effects in this movie went on to work on Aliens the next year. Okay, that doesn't really mean anything. The people making this movie did not know how to shoot special effects. For the first 90% of this movie, the creature is in shadow to the point that you can't tell what the hell you're looking at, not just in terms of the creature, but on the screen at all most of the time. Then for the last 10%, they said, you know what, let's just show the creature. And they just point the camera right at it, put lights on it everywhere, and it doesn't even look like a guy in a suit. It looks like a freaking inflatable or something. It looks so bad, and it just stands there and doesn't do anything. Oh man, and then they blow it up at the end or something. There was a good head explosion scene at one point. But yeah, this was a pretty forgettable movie. The only other interesting thing was that Klaus Kinski was in it. And he's a very unique actor, and he was by far the best part of the movie. But he was only in it for about maybe 5 minutes or something. I did read that the part where he gropes this woman was, I don't know if you'd call it an ad lib, but it was improvised by him on the spot. Which is not a surprise because he was a creepy weirdo. But he was an interesting creepy weirdo. But that's still not a reason to watch this movie. It was really boring. Definitely skip it.
Are you encouraging random groping of people? I think you should clarify no.
Only if it makes the movie more interesting. I watched a movie from 1973 called Torso. This was a Giallo movie, which we've talked about before that I'm not a huge fan of.
Yet you keep watching them.
Yeah, I mean, the style sometimes is interesting, and the music a lot of times is good. The first 3/4 of this movie was pretty much what I expected. It was kind of just, you've got a murderer killing people, and it was kind of whatever. It wasn't terrible, but it was kind of whatever. The last half hour, though, was pretty good. There's one last survivor who's trapped in this house, and the killer doesn't know that she's there, and she's kind of trying to sneak around and try to escape while he's chopping up the bodies of the other people that he's killed. So I guess, I don't know. It might be worth it just for the last half hour, because the last half hour was pretty good. But the rest of the movie was not great. It was kind of forgettable. As typical for these movies, you had a lot of red herrings, which one of them was really funny because the killer wears a scarf that has a pattern on it in red and black. And there's another character that has a scarf with the same pattern, but it's black and red. But when you look at it, they're the same colors. When you put it on, you can't tell what the pattern is. You just see colors.
Right.
So they think it's the first character, but then they're like, oh, wait, no. His is black on red. The other one was red on black. But you can't tell what it looks like when they're wearing it. You just see the colors. So I thought that was funny. So I don't know. Check out the movie for the last half hour, but you can be doing something else up until that point. And the last thing I watched this month was Don't Look Up, which is a movie that came out on Netflix last year.
Oh, wow. You usually don't watch new movies.
Yeah, or Netflix original movies. I was intrigued by the concept of this movie at first because it's about, I'm sure a lot of people have seen it already. It's like one of the highest rated things on Netflix ever. It's about a comet that's going to hit the Earth and kind of the trend of people not wanting to believe in it, which at first I assumed was an obvious allegory for the coronavirus. It kind of turned out that it's more of a like a climate change kind of thing. But honestly, you could inject a bunch of different things into it, which is part of the problem with it is, first of all, it's over 2 hours long, which is, I don't know, an hour and a half too long. They try to satirize so many different aspects of society and so many different things that they just bounce around between everything. And scenes pop up that have nothing to do with anything else just because they thought it would be funny to stick it in there, and it's not funny. And any one of those scenes goes on for way too long. And again, the point of the movie is to kind of make fun of society and people's reactions to things and, the way people don't take things seriously when they should. But they try to make it funny, but it's just not funny. The way it's presented, it feels very ineptly put together. It's directed by Adam McKay, who directed a bunch of Will Ferrell movies, and I don't like Will Ferrell movies. I'll give you an example of the humor not working in this movie. The main characters are Leonardo DiCaprio, Jennifer Lawrence, and then they couldn't get Don Cheadle, so they got the guy that played Turk in the Netflix Marvel shows. And the three of them play scientists that find out about this comet that's going to hit the Earth, and they're in the White House, and they're hungry. And this guy says, I'll go get you some snacks. And he comes back with snacks and says, man, they charge a lot in this place. Like, I need money from all of you. So he takes money from him, and then he leaves. Later on, Jennifer Lawrence goes to get some more food herself, and it turns out that all the snacks are free. Okay, there's the joke. The guy charged them, he's just getting money out of them. It's fine, whatever. It was vaguely amusing. She comes back to the other people, and she explains the joke. She says, he charged us for food that was free. He got the money for himself because he wanted when we could have gotten it for free. It's like, okay, I get it. You don't need to explain the joke. Yeah, it was so dumb. But as if that wasn't bad enough, later on, like halfway through the movie, she brings it up again because, they need as many jokes as they can. And she says, that guy charged us, 6 months ago or whatever for food that was free. It's like, oh, man, I get it. I got it before you explained it. Once you explained it, it wasn't funny anymore. And then now you're bringing it up again and reminding me how unfunny that was. And then they bring it up again later in the movie.
Jeez.
Yeah, that is their approach to comedy with this movie. They have to make sure that the dumbest people in the audience get the jokes. But if you have to explain things that much and make the humor so obvious, it's not funny anymore. And that sums up this entire movie. It wasn't funny.
All right. Well, I was thinking about watching it because people were talking about it, but no, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it got to the point where about 3/4 of the way through, I realized that Netflix still had that thing where you could speed up the movie, and I watched it at 1.5 times speed because I just wanted to get it over with. And I think that's the only movie I've ever done that on.
Not that I don't watch bad movies, as we're about to find out in a few minutes.
Yeah, I'm sure. Oh, man, yeah, it was awful. It was not funny. It was not entertaining. I would not recommend it to anyone. And that was the last thing I watched this month. I did read one other thing, which was the collection of Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen issues by Jack Kirby, which were from August 1970 to April 1972. When Jack Kirby left Marvel in 1970, this was the first thing that he did at DC. They basically told him he could do whatever he wanted as long as he took over one title that they already had going. So he took over something that nobody cared about. And he actually made it really good. The stuff he was doing at DC was his Fourth World stuff with Darkseid and Apocalypse and New Genesis and all that. And it's very big cosmic stuff. And he does introduce those ideas in Jimmy Olsen first. But for the most part, it deals with other kind of 1 or 2 part stories that don't have anything to do with that. There's a planet, a miniature planet inhabited by movie monsters. There's a Loch Ness Monster storyline. There's all this stuff about the DNA Project, I think it was called, where they were doing experiments on creatures and cloning and stuff like that. And of course, Superman's involved in the background. They were very entertaining. And I was really impressed actually with all of Jack Kirby's Fourth World stuff, because this is the first time I've really gone through all of it. I was impressed with his plotting in terms of the way stories build and come to a conclusion that feels like it has weight to it, and that it makes you think about the story afterward. It's not the kind of thing where you just read it and then just put it aside. There is more to it than that. And I definitely think the other Fourth World stuff was better than Jimmy Olsen. This is clearly the one that he felt like he just had to do because they made him do it. But it was still good. I'm sure Jimmy Olsen has never been as good as this.
Yeah, if you asked me to read something focused on Jimmy Olsen, I'd probably say what else he got.
Yeah, so this is probably the only time you'll ever hear me recommend, no, you know what, I mean, the Silver Age Jimmy Olsen stories are so stupid and so ridiculous that I would also recommend those, but for completely different reasons. These were actually good.
I'd say a lot of DC Silver Age stuff is like that.
Yeah, that's true. The only real negative I would throw at it is Jack Kirby's dialogue is not great. He has weird sentence patterns where normally you would read a comic and somebody would say, hey, look, it's Superman. In a Jack Kirby comic, somebody would say, hey, look, it's Superman, or something like that. And it's weird. It takes you out of it while you're trying to read it. And I really don't understand what he was trying to do with some of those weird sentence patterns. But I would definitely recommend reading this. So what did you check out this month?
I watched this terrible 2000 movie called Starforce. And it's up to debate whether or not that's one word or two. Because even in the movie, it's presented both ways. It was this low-budget, really shitty, made-for-TV movie. Everything about it was bad. The acting was terrible. The special effects were particularly egregious. Imagine somebody saw Beast Wars and said, man, that looks so good. Maybe too good. Can we dial it back a little bit? That's what all the outer space stuff looks like. And it wouldn't be as bad if they didn't put huge extended sequences of it in the movie.
I see that Vernon Wells is listed among the cast.
Yeah.
Was he as good in this movie as he is in others?
You know, I honestly was falling asleep so much, I didn't even notice he was in it. This guy's a soldier, goes to this planet, and there are things going on that he wasn't aware of, and they have to save the day. I'm not even sure why I watched it. I think the year on the movie was not the correct year, so I was duped. But then it was too late. I already started it. I watched a 1959 Vincent Price movie called The Bat. I wasn't sure if it was going to be one of those less interesting Vincent Price movies. I like Vincent Price a lot.
Yeah, me too.
The opening credits start off with this big band jazz number, which threw me off right away. So we open with this assistant bank manager calling over his wife saying, oh man, there's like $1 million missing from the bank. And they say, oh, you should call the bank manager. And he goes, well, he's on vacation in the woods. He doesn't want to be bothered. And then we cut to the bank manager in his cabin going, you know, I just stole $1 million from my bank. And he's up there with Vincent Price, who's his doctor. And Vincent Price goes, oh, that's interesting. Tell me more. And the bank manager goes, well, here's how I did it. They're never going to suspect me. Here's where I hid it. And while he's explaining it, Vincent Price is going, that's interesting, while pulling a rifle off of the wall. And then he blows him away. It was really funny. But it's called The Bat because at the same time, there's this serial killer who just dresses up in all black with a trench coat and has like claw things, who calls himself The Bat and just kills people.
Oh, that's not what I expected.
and there's a mystery novelist in this mansion where the money is hidden. So you're meant to think that Vincent Price is the bat, and he even studies bats in his lab. So there's kind of two plots going on at the same time of who is the killer, where is the money. It was entertaining. It wasn't great. And it was interesting to see Vincent Price not always dressed in a suit. You know, at one point he's in a flannel shirt with an apron on because he's cooking eggs or something. But he's so tall. Seeing him next to other actors, I always forget how tall he is.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm thinking I've only ever seen him in a suit or in a robe.
I'm always playing catch up on things I never watched when they were popular, so I watched Taken from 2008.
Oh, man.
With Liam Neeson, the first one. I think there's like 12, and a TV show, maybe 2 TV series, I don't know.
That was one of those movies that back in the day everybody was like, you gotta see this movie, it's so good. And then I watched it, and it wasn't.
It was everything I thought it would be, but dumber. It was very disappointing to see Famke Janssen in there. It was one of the movies where everything was so convenient for Liam Neeson because he's supposed to be this super person that can solve any problem and always make situations work to his advantage to get out of stuff. But he doesn't ever actually do anything. Everything is set up exactly for him. So it could be anybody. So at one point his hands are tied above him to this pipe and these guys are like, we're going to kill you. And he pulls down really hard, and the pipe knocks out one guy. The steam from the pipe goes in another guy's face, and then he pulls a valve with his still tied hands that allow him to just escape. Like, anyone could do that if that situation was like that. And anyone probably would, because if someone's coming at you with a knife or something, you're probably going to freak out and pull your weight down. And the whole time he's trying to be such a badass. And it's so funny, because closer to the beginning of his career, he was always the romantic lead.
Yeah, I still find it hard to think of Liam Neeson as an action star.
Not for lack of trying.
I mean, even in Darkman, as goofy as that movie was, it was kind of weird.
Especially because that was kind of a half and half, because he spent half the movie being all lovey-dovey.
Yeah, which I think was an intentional tonal shift in that movie.
Yeah. I watched this movie from 1993, directed by Carl Reiner, called Fatal Instinct, which is a spoof of suspense thrillers, maybe, with some like psychological film noir stuff thrown in there. I read the description, and when I started, I wasn't sure if it was going to be clever tongue-in-cheek or more in your face, and it turned out to be way in your face. It reminded me a lot of The Naked Gun, but not as funny. There were some gags in there, but it tried way too hard and took some jokes way too far for way too long that were not funny. It's got this guy, who I'm never sure how to say his name, and Sean Young during her
insane period where she was trying to be Catwoman.
Yeah, and like Ace Ventura, that kind of stuff. It wasn't worth watching. It felt too stupid. I only laughed maybe 2 times out of 10,000 jokes. I watched the first Mission Impossible from 1996. Because when it came out, I remember seeing it in theaters, and I wasn't sure if it was good or not. I remembered it being kind of like James Bond movies, but it's really not, because 1, you have the team, and 2, they're not afraid to throw in some of that humor. And after I watched it, I watched Mission Impossible 2, and then Mission Impossible 3, and then Mission Impossible 4. And then they stopped becoming free, so I stopped. The movies stand as a series. They make sense as a series, I guess, and they all connect to each other, except I'm not sure why Tom Cruise hasn't figured out that everyone's going to betray him at some point and they're all lying to him.
Does Leonard Nimoy ever show up in any of them?
Not in the ones I saw.
Because I know he was in the original series.
And the movies connect to each other so much that the 4th one is the first one where Ving Rhames is not a main character on the team, but he shows up at the end in the epilogue. But if you haven't watched any of the other ones, you don't understand why that matters, or why everyone's giving him hugs and high fives and whatever.
I got the impression that these were more standalone than that.
And Tom Cruise started producing them himself, I think starting with the 2nd one. So it's a vehicle starring him, produced by him, all about him. And they're not bad, I guess. They're action movies with cool gadgets and stuff. I had seen the first Alien vs. Predator, but I had never seen the 2nd one, Alien vs. Predator Requiem, from 2007. And I told myself, it can't be much worse or much stupider than the first one. And I had no idea how wrong I could be. And I was reading background on both of them after I watched it. Supposedly, people were complaining about the first one that there wasn't enough Predator stuff. The Predator wasn't cool enough, or some shit.
Because that's what was wrong with that movie.
Like pointing out these are the things that make it not a good movie, instead of it just being the worst fucking piece of shit ever. And in this one, the director said, I took that feedback to heart. So this one has a lot of Predator.
I think it was a pair of brothers that directed it.
Well, between the two of them, you would think they would have half a brain. All the human characters, this movie might as well have been called Cliché, the movie with a Predator. All the human characters have the most cliche dialogue and situations where the one guy's like, it's been a long time since I've been back here. I grew up in this town. And he met up with the cop, and the cop's like, yeah, it's a good thing maybe you can help your brother because he's getting in with the bad crowd. And that brother has a crush on the popular girl, but the jocks are like, get out of here, loser. And then they beat him up. Everything was just so stupid and cliche and annoying and boring. And I just wanted to turn it off, but I couldn't.
I remember one of the things that they were kind of hyping up about the movie was that the creature effects were all practical, which doesn't make the movie good in itself.
Somebody in the production said we can't show too much of it. We have to use lighting and shadow in an effective way, which is a very valid point that can make or break a movie with creatures in it. Unfortunately, they didn't understand how to do that effectively, so 99% of the movie is in pitch black. You can't see anything ever, but it's an action movie, so things are happening so quickly all the time.
Yeah, I do remember being confused as to what was happening sometimes.
And the main monster is a predator alien hybrid from the end of the first one. And the way it makes new ones is it basically has the entire alien queen anatomy within its humanoid body. So it just shoots out its extra mouth into people's mouths and just starts shoving eggs inside of them. But not one, like 6. So there's one point where this person's stomach bursts open and there's 6 little aliens inside all screaming and shit.
I don't remember that.
And then at the end, I think the whole town gets nuked. And the main characters survive, or at least some of them. And they see the military people who just nuked the town. And these military people lied to them, too. They said, everyone's going to be safe. Go to the center of town. And then they dropped a bomb on it. But the main characters look at the army people and they're like, oh, thank God you're here. Not, you just told us to go here and killed everybody. And then the movie's over.
And I'm still waiting on that sequel.
At least the first one took place, in the Arctic or wherever. That wasn't some temple under the ice, and it was kind of self-contained. This one was a town in Colorado. I mean, give me a break. I watched The Silence of the Lambs from 1991, back when Anthony Hopkins was still trying, which is a cool movie. I like it. I think Jodie Foster does a good job. I think it's interesting seeing Scott Glenn act like a normal person and not beat up children. I think it's a good adaptation of the book.
So you read the book, right? But not the first book, just that one.
Right.
I've read the first one, but not that one. I also like this movie a lot, I just want to say.
Well, that's just because you like moths. What else has Jonathan Demme directed?
He started out working for Roger Corman.
That makes sense because Roger Corman is in this movie.
Isn't he like the FBI director?
He's someone in high authority, yeah.
And then I know he did like Philadelphia with Tom Hanks, which I haven't seen. He did that movie with Anne Hathaway, something with marriage.
I think that was Batman Dark Rise or something.
Yeah, for as good as Silence of the Lambs is, I don't think I've seen any other Jonathan Demme movies. Probably should.
But it was one movie in this list this month that was good. I watched The Magnetic Monster from 1953, which was not what I thought it was going to be at all. It had a lot of actual science in it, and there isn't actually a physical monster. They wanted a lot of real science in it, and they actually went as far as to use footage from the giant room-filling computers at the time. There's a scientist who has radiation sickness, and he's carrying this briefcase with him. He reveals that he made this radioactive isotope by just bombarding it with radioactive particles for weeks, and then for some reason he's surprised when it turns out to be deadly. It absorbs a bunch of energy every 11 hours, I think, and just keeps getting bigger. And every time it's going to suck up more energy. So they have to figure out how to stop it before it destroys the Earth. It's going to break the Earth from its orbit around the sun because of the magnetic forces or something like that. And in order to stop it, they have to use enough counter energy before it gets too powerful. So it was interesting in that it wasn't an actual conscious sentient being in terms of a monster. It was just science, which I think fits perfectly into the atomic era when this movie was made.
Yeah.
I noticed a lot of the movie had voiceover narration, way too much of explaining things when they really could have just had the characters talk to each other and say the same things, but they don't. And part of it probably, again, was because of all the stock footage of actual big computers and laboratories and stuff. It was an interesting endeavor, I think, on the filmmaker's part. I watched the first season of this show called Lore, which is based on a podcast, and the series came out in 2017. And it was really interesting at the beginning because they explore the stories behind myths and curses and where it came from historically. The first few episodes were really good because it was very fact-based with evidence and exploring where that stuff came from. And it has dramatizations of the situations. But as it went on, it kind of flipped where the dramatization took up most of the episodes. And the actual explanations took up less, and that's kind of where I drifted off. I watched The Town from 2010, which was one of Ben Affleck's earlier movies where he took on more than just being in it. It felt like a movie where someone was just taking the reins and learning how to do that kind of stuff. It wasn't great, but it wasn't terrible. It's just kind of a movie that happened.
Was that the one with Jeremy Renner?
Yeah, and I'm going to point out I'm not a fan of Jeremy Renner in pretty much everything.
I agree. He's not a good actor at all.
I recently played Doom 3, and I saw the movie Doom Annihilation, and I said, oh, that's got to be terrible. So I watched it, and it actually came out in 2019, and the reason it's based on Doom 3 is because the people making the movie did not have permission to use the stuff from the 2016 Doom game, or anything after that. So I said, I played Doom 3, I'll know the characters, oh, it's going to be so many Easter eggs, and I'm going to go, yeah, I know what you're talking about. It was so stupid. Yes, there were Easter eggs, I suppose. Not the least of which is them all carrying around these big, plasticky red, yellow, and blue key cards to open doors. But playing it off like it's a legitimate, serious thing. You got Dr. Petruger, who's the main antagonist, who opens up the portal to hell. The effects looked so bad. And this was 2019. I'm sure some money went into this movie. It was just really bad. There's really only one demon type, and going back to your discussion earlier about how lighting and stuff really can make or break, it breaks because they just put the camera right on it and have it look like a person in a costume. I watched Terminator 2, which is one of my favorite movies, and every time I watch it, it just reinforces how awesome it is and how awesome James Cameron used to be.
Yeah.
James Cameron was on such a hot streak of making all these incredibly good movies, and then decided he was done and wanted to go to the bottom of the ocean instead. But then said, I'm still kind of going to make movies, but not really give a shit.
See, I don't think he doesn't care. I think he knows exactly what he's doing, but he's trying to aim for the mainstream, and I think he succeeds at that. I think that's why Avatar was so big. It wasn't a good movie, but he wasn't trying to make a good movie. He was trying to make a movie that would appeal to the mainstream, and it worked.
But that's my point. He used to not...
Yeah, he used to be more concerned with actual quality, yeah.
So after that, I decided to follow up with Terminator 3. Everything about it, everything the characters say, everything they do. Like in the beginning, you got Claire Danes trying to scan something in the store and it's not working because, it's a machine. And she looks at her fiancé and goes, I hate machines. Which is such a stupid thing to say. I could see someone saying, I hate computers, or, man, I hate this new phone. I have never heard anybody saying, I hate machines. Maybe Gutenberg's first employee or something. All the dumb jokes. And I will say Terminator 2 does have a decent amount of humor. I would argue in some places it doesn't work.
I would agree.
But Terminator 3 has way too much and none of it works. And all the nods to the ones before it are painful.
I haven't seen it since it came out on DVD. I only watched it once. but I remember how excited I was leading up to it just because of how good the first two movies were. And, I was still dumb enough at the time to think that maybe it was actually going to be good.
Well, no James Cameron involvement at all. And I remember reading something that Arnold told James Cameron they want to do another one and they want me to be in it. And James Cameron just said, ask for a shit ton of money then. And then Arnold did. And then Arnold made a shit ton of money. And every time I get pulled over and I look at a cop and I go, I like your gun, it never ends well for me.
I remember on the Sci-Fi Channel, at one point, they were going to show a sneak preview or whatever, and I was excited. They were showing some dumb movie or something. I was like, wow, I don't care about this, but I want to see something about Terminator 3. And the clip they showed was that clip. Out of everything they could have picked to make you want to see the movie, that's what they chose.
Oh, boy. I watched Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory from 1971.
Starring Gene Hackman as Willy Wonka.
That would be something else. It's such a weird movie, the way it was made, why it was made, how it was made, the fact that it has very little to do with the source material. I know it's reported that Roald Dahl hated it, and I'm not surprised because it's basically just borrowing the name, well, not even the actual name of his book. I think Gene Wilder is great. If he wasn't in this movie would have just been a throwaway 70s whatever.
I agree.
I think it stood the test of time. I'm not sure why.
Yeah, I've thought about that because it's one of those movies that the same kind of annoying people quote things like Monty Python or The Big Lebowski. I definitely think it's a weird one for people to be so focused on.
And I wonder if it was very popular at the time when it actually came out, or if it wasn't until later.
Yeah, I wonder if it was something that it played on TV a lot in like the 90s or something, and people remember it from that, but I don't know.
And I followed up by watching Charlie and the Chocolate Factory from 2005, the Tim Burton one, which is not good. There's really no redeeming qualities outside of looking at Christopher Lee with giant fake teeth. Johnny Depp is trying way too hard to be quirky and weird. If I had to describe the whole movie, I would say it's just a big, gaudy spectacle. The effects are stupid, the writing is stupid, the actors are stupid. The only one I don't mind, I guess, is Freddie Highmore playing Charlie. But even so, he has some idiotic lines too. Candy doesn't have to have a point. And it might have been more successful if it wasn't trying to be a new and improved version of the 70s movie. If it had just gone its own way. Especially because the 70s movie deviated from the book so far. Those stupid songs. It was like Danny Elfman was told, I want you to make dumb, annoying songs. No, they can't be good. They have to be bad. Painful to watch. So sticking with Johnny Depp, I decided to give him another chance, and I watched Dark Shadows, which I've never seen before. And I've also never seen the TV show before.
I've seen a couple of the old Dark Shadows movies, which are kind of like some episodes of the show adapted into a movie, which I did enjoy those.
So this movie was 2012, after the world-ending apocalypse, and we all relocated on the top of Mount Everest. And I will say, for most of Tim Burton's more recent stuff, where it just feels like he doesn't really care.
Yeah, just going through the motions and all the same generic things you expect.
This, at least for the beginning half, maybe even a little further, felt more like an actual Tim Burton movie. By the end, it all just fell apart and it was stupid. But I was actually more engaged in this than really any more recent Tim Burton thing. I thought Johnny Depp actually did a good job. And again, I'm not basing it off of any of the original stuff because I've never seen any of the original stuff. But by the end, it just kind of fell apart and there were just a bunch of stupid things of trying to shove in as much as they could from the old show. You could tell, even not having seen the old show, I could tell that's what they were doing. Literally in the last 5 minutes, one of the characters turns into a werewolf and goes, I'm a werewolf, get over it.
Is it a really dumb CGI werewolf?
Of course it is. Sticking with vampires, I watched Interview with the Vampire from 1994. And if you told me, all right, we're going to make this gothic horror vampire movie, and I want Tom Cruise and I want Brad Pitt, I would say, go away. I remember the first time I watched this, I was very surprised of how effective it was. And even this time, I was surprised at how effective this movie is. I haven't read the novel, and the movie is not a typical vampire movie. It is Brad Pitt recounting his story up until that point. And it goes through a lot of time periods. It goes through his interactions and relationship with Tom Cruise, and Kirsten Dunst is in there too. I actually like this movie quite a bit, in part for it standing out from other vampire movies, and in part for it just being well written and well directed. And again, well acted with Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt, which is so weird.
Okay, I'm pretty sure I own the book somewhere. I mean, obviously I got it for a reason, but I haven't read it yet.
Someone at work had watched Squid Game, so they were checking out more Korean TV shows, which I think is a good side effect of those types of shows. They get people to go outside of their normal comfort zone in terms of movies and TV shows.
Right.
So he said he watched The Silent Sea. So I watched The Silent Sea, which is about this group of astronauts who go to the moon because there's a water shortage on Earth.
Is there more water on the moon?
They're sent there to retrieve basically a package, but they're not told what it is. And when they get there, the station, everyone is dead, and it looks like they've all been drowned. And it turns out that they found water on the moon, and it can self-replicate. But when it comes into contact with living cells, it replicates basically like a virus. So anyone who's exposed to it starts puking out copious amounts of water, and their whole body just fills up with water, and they eventually drown.
It wouldn't be water then, though. I mean, is it still water?
They call it lunar water, and it's not actually water, but in the show it serves the same purpose as water. They are hoping they can somehow harness it. And there were some twists and stuff. It was okay. It wasn't bad. I watched this show called Great News, and I watched it because it was made by one of the writers of 30 Rock and executive produced by Tina Fey. And I like 30 Rock a lot. And I was surprised I had not heard of this show. And it was from 2017. And it definitely had that 30 Rock sense of writing and humor. The only thing I didn't really like was the premise. The premise of 30 Rock is based on Tina Fey's real life. You know, she was working on SNL and all of that. That's where all those experiences came from. This one felt so sitcom-y. Let me read you a sentence from Wikipedia. The series, set in the world of television news, follows an up-and-coming news producer who finds herself dealing with a new intern, her mother. Reading that sentence made me say, ugh, I don't know if I want to watch this show. Thankfully, there are other things going on, and the show turned out to be funny enough for me. I watched True Grit, the Coen Brothers remake.
Okay, I've seen the original, but not the remake.
Remake was 2010. Jeff Bridges, who does a good job. A better job than in some of the movies where he just says, I'm Jeff Bridges, and that's enough. And apparently the people making the movie say, you're right. Get Matt Damon in there too. The writing and the dialogue makes it work. It sets it apart from other Westerns, and it's one of the Coen brothers' better directed movies. Because I think we've talked about this before. Sometimes they have movies that are so good, and then the next movie will be like, eh, and then the next movie will be really good again. I wouldn't say this is one of their best ones, but it's one of the ones I would categorize in the good category.
Who was the other person you said was in it?
Matt Damon. The main character is Haley Steinfeld. She's not a bad kid actor, which is good because she's the main character.
Mm-hmm.
And seeing things she had been in before, it could have ended poorly. I watched Jonah Hex from 2010 with Josh Brolin, which I had not seen, and it was just as dumb as I thought it was going to be. I've read some of the Bronze Age Jonah Hex stuff, and I really liked it. This movie felt exactly like comic book movies are big right now. What comic book characters don't have movies yet? Let's do one of that. No, I'm not going to read them. It was dumb, mindless action with not good writing.
Is Josh Brolin good at least?
As good as he can be, I suppose.
So really good then.
I watched Hollow Man from 2000, which I was looking forward to. I've never seen before, but you know, it's Paul Verhoeven, science fiction, good track record. So let down by this movie, which also had Josh Brolin, but he was not the Hollow Man. Kevin Bacon was the Hollow Man. Way too much focus on Kevin Bacon's dick in this movie. You think I'm joking, but I'm not joking. Talking about it, showing it in all its weird CGI stages of becoming hollow. He pretty much just plays a dick who has a huge ego and wants to be the first invisible person because their funding is going to get cut, etc. The actors felt like typical late 90s, early 2000s actors, the way they did everything and the way they said everything.
Yeah, that's disappointing to hear.
That's all I watched. I read the Essential Defenders Volume 3, which were written mostly by Steve Gerber and David Kraft from the late 70s. And it seemed like there was a lot of drug use going on somewhere inside Marvel.
Yeah, they talk about that in Slugfest a little bit.
A lot of weird stuff that just compounds onto other weird stuff. For example, so there's the Headmen, which is this group composed of, I can't remember their names. There's a guy with a melty face. There's the guy who has the human head on the gorilla body. And there's Chandu the Mystic, who's just a magician guy, basically. And they have this plan to, take over the world or something. Oh, later they get another one. I can't remember her name, but it's a woman with a globe for a head. And then the globe is super science, so it can turn into anything and have anything come out of it. It was weird. And at one point, they kidnap Nighthawk and take out his brain, and they put Chandu's brain inside his body so he can infiltrate the Defenders. And he goes and does a pretty crappy job because he doesn't know anything. And they eventually figure it out, and Doctor Strange says, I'm going to use magic to not transfer brains, but transfer consciousness to try and get Nighthawk's consciousness back into Chandu's brain, which is actually in Nighthawk's body. But it doesn't work. What ends up happening is, oh boy, let me try and remember. Oh, I forgot to mention, the Hulk found a baby deer in the woods and brought it to Doctor Strange's house. That's important. So, Chandu's consciousness goes into the deer's brain. Jack Norris, who is Valkyrie's ex-husband's consciousness, goes into Nighthawk's body, which has Chandu's brain. And I'm trying to remember what else happened with that exchange. Nighthawk's consciousness is somewhere else. I can't remember. Eventually, everyone kind of figures out what happens, I think, and the Headmen get Chandu back, and they say, okay, we're going to try and put your brain back in your body. Yeah, I think that's what happens. But they end up making him a new body that looks like you told a 7-year-old, I want you to draw me the craziest monster you can think of. They don't explain why they do it, they just do it. So he has this weird monster head. Instead of arms, he's got 8 lampreys. He's got big wings. He's got eagle talons. It doesn't make any sense. And he wakes up and he is justifiably pissed. He's like, what the hell is this? Like, my body's right over there. What is wrong with you guys? So there's this whole thing. And in between all of that, Nebulon shows up, who wants to take over the Earth, but is not in league with the Headmen. And he does that by telling everybody they're bozos. And he starts this whole cult called the Bozos. And makes people put on clown masks and keep calling themselves idiots. And that's going to make them superheroes. Eventually, Doctor Strange leaves the Defenders, and Nighthawk takes over. They pull in some other people, like Power Man's in there for a while, but he's only doing it because he's getting paid, which I thought was pretty funny. Hellcat joins in. Devil Slayer? Is that a person?
I don't know. Oh, is it the son of Satan?
No. Well, he does show up too. It's a different person, though. The Red Guardian shows up.
Like the Russian Red Guardian?
Yeah, the second one. The woman, right?
Okay.
Is that the second one?
Yeah, or maybe the third. It's definitely not the first.
And there's a whole thing with Namor where he's trying to prevent a nuclear explosion, and the person responsible for that pulls the Red Guardian in because he wants her to do it with him. And he becomes this supervillain, Sergei, who just sits on a chair, and the way he was moving around and talking made me think of Metron. Oh, can you also explain to me who the hell the little elf with the gun is? Because he pops up in random issues, and they never explain it, and he just kills people.
I've heard about that, and yeah, I think that was just the thing. I think they were trying to see how much they could get away with.
Does that ever resolve in anything for Marvel?
I don't know.
That's really annoying. Scorpio shows up, who is Nick Fury's brother, and he makes a Nick Fury robot who we're supposed to think is Nick Fury. And he ends up kidnapping people, and we got a human character called Dollar Bill. You can tell I have a lot of respect by the way I said his name. Who is just a regular person who meets up with Valkyrie, and they end up becoming friends, and he films all the defenders doing stuff. So he goes with them to do shit, which doesn't make any sense. And it finishes with Xenogenesis, where Doctor Strange has the Eye of Agamotto when it gets stolen by demons, and they use it to bring demons into the world. That was the end of that volume. Maybe if I had been doing drugs while I was reading it, it would have made more sense.
Was it good?
It was entertaining because you could not predict what was going to happen next. Last month I played Doom 3. This month I played the expansion Resurrection of Evil, which was a completely different experience because it took out all of the challenge. At the beginning you're given this artifact that eventually slows down time, makes you invincible, and you can kill everything in one hit, regardless of what weapon you're using. It was kind of disappointing, and I felt like it was just going through the motions because it wasn't challenging. There wasn't anything to stop you. That's all I really have to say about that. I played BanjoKazooie because that went up on the Nintendo Switch Online service. And I think that game came out at the right time for what kind of game it is because it's right on the cusp of the collectathon era. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Mm-hmm.
The only required collectibles in each level are 100 notes and 10 of the puzzle pieces, which is really refreshing because you look at something newer like the Arkham Asylum games. How many Riddler clue things are there? Like 1,000?
I don't know. There's a lot.
But even Rare making Donkey Kong 64 or BanjoTooie, they even went a little too far there. And that's the same console made by the same developer. It's not a long game, even to get everything. And I think it sets itself apart from other 3D platformers like Mario 64 in that the scaling is different. Mario 64, your character's a certain size, the stages are a certain size. But for BanjoKazooie, your character's a certain size, but it's much smaller compared to the scale of the stage. Some of those stages get pretty damn big, and it takes longer to get around. And there's some frustrating parts in it, a couple. People who have played that game might remember the engine room from Rusty Bucket Bay. Ugh, God, I just wanted to put my fist through the TV. Goofy humor, pretty good game. I also played Mario Tennis. Let me set this up for you, and then I want to ask you a question. There's the singles tournament, Mushroom Flower Star. And once you do that, your character can be super upgraded. And I had heard that if you beat all the singles tournaments with all of the characters, you unlock a secret tournament. And to me, it sounded like something pre-internet that a kid would tell you at recess.
Yeah.
The Planet Cup and the Rainbow Cup. And I would say, you're full of shit. But I actually did it, and it's true. It was actually true. It was so weird, and I had never done that as a kid. So I did that, and that was quite a few hours on that game just to do that. I also busted out the GameCube this month. I played Paper Mario, The Thousand-Year Door, and I talked about the first Paper Mario last month. And I had never played the sequel, but people always put it on this pedestal. They say it's the zenith of this series. So I finally played this game from start to finish, and I gotta say, overall, I would take the first one over this one. The battle system is 100% better, so much more variety in it, but the game itself is too bloated. It takes too long to do things, there's a lot of needless running around, a bunch of empty filler in between. For instance, you go get the one crystal star, it's this whole chapter of the game, it takes a long time, then you come back to the hub to find out where the next one is. And they tell you, oh, you actually have to go all the way back to where you just came from to talk to one person and then come all the way back here and then we'll tell you where to go. And it was really dumb. And I was thinking there's got to be something else. Like on my way there, something's going to happen. No, that's what I had to do. And that happens more than once. It was very frustrating and it felt like padding just to make the game longer. So if you're deciding which one to play the first one. I also played FZero GX, which is the GameCube iteration of the FZero series, and we haven't had an FZero game since then. And people keep saying we need another one, but after playing this GameCube one, it would have to be really, really, really good, because I had forgotten how awesome this game was and how well put together it was. There's so much content in it, it feels so good. The gameplay, the tightness of everything, the way your vehicle reacts, the fact they're just throwing 30 vehicles on a track is awesome. The courses are awesome. I think part of what makes it so effective is your vehicle is very small compared to the track. I think most racing games have a commonly established ratio of how big your vehicle is versus how wide the road is. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of characters in it. There's a lot of backstory for all the characters. It's pretty impressive for a racing game. And it's Sega working with Nintendo. So sometimes Sega cuts corners and makes games that don't feel very good. But I think the fact that Nintendo was like, this is our IP, and if you're going to develop this, you're going to have to like quality check it by us. This was also when FZero AX came out, and that was the FZero arcade game, which makes sense because, Sega's so good at that. And the GameCube was the era when Nintendo was really experimenting with what they could do with their hardware. So one of my favorite parts was you could take your GameCube memory card to the arcade machine and plug it in and get certain stuff that you could bring back to your home console.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. And it's possible to unlock all the arcade stuff on the home console version too. But it does show how dated it is at times. You're familiar with the mid-2000s 3D character models always bobbing up and down when they're stationary, right?
Yes.
This is the game I think of that happening so much. So goofy. I don't understand who decided across the board this is how all video games need to be for 3D character models now. Some are not as bad. I think of something like Mario 64. He bobs a little bit, but this is really, really bad because the characters are so stiff, but they're also bobbing. So their arms are stuck out in front of them in a really weird position. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And the last thing I played, which I played a lot of, was Gauntlet Dark Legacy, which I'm a big fan of the Gauntlet Legends series. There's not a lot of thinking involved. It's an arcade experience, and it's midway during that golden phase where they were just super creative with all kinds of stuff. So this was the era of NFL Blitz, NHL Hits, all those games where you say it's a football game, but not like any other football game.
Yeah, I played a lot of NHL Hits back in the day.
So they did that with the Gauntlet series, swords and sorcery and stuff, but very goofy and tongue-in-cheek. And playing with 4 people was always a blast. Even playing by yourself is pretty fun. And it's the GameCube version, and 99% of people have version 1.0, which is buggy as hell. Like, we're talking game-crashing bugs. Some quality control issues going on there. And that's all I did this month, which was, not that much. All right, let's close it up.
Yeah.
So if you made it to the end, wake up. I think we do these more for ourselves, just to discuss stuff, but I'm okay with it.
When you watch as many things as we do, there's a lot of things you want to talk about. And even some of the things we talked about here, I'm sure we could have gone on about. So it is a good outlet for us to get some stress out, I think, sometimes on how much we hate some of these things that we watch, I think.
Even looking back at my watch history, I forget a lot of things I actually watched.
Yeah, that happens to me too. And you always have way more than I do, so I'm assuming you probably leave stuff on in the background a lot more too.
So stay tuned, like and subscribe, and we'll be doing it again in February. Is that good?
Yeah, that's good.
All right.